Carolina's House of Representatives may change the way gun owners buy ammunition.
The Better Business Bureau has a consumer alert about an online ammo shop.
Starting Monday, background checks will be required to purchase ammo in California.
Despite the licensing requirement, the main goal of HR 1207 is to ban ordinary people from purchasing ammunition online.
Ammunition background check regime infringes on the fundamental right to keep and bear arms.
The only people that you can really scrutinize are law-abiding citizens.
A new bill could kill online ammo sales forever. A brand new bill just dropped in Congress, and if it passes, you will never be able to buy ammunition online again. But that's not even the worst part. Buried inside this legislation is a provision that would essentially create a government watch list for anyone who buys more than 1,000 rounds. And if you think that sounds like a lot of ammo, stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to realize just how many Americans this would affect and why this bill is far more dangerous than its sponsors want you to believe. So here's what's happening. Members of Congress have introduced a piece of legislation called the Stop Online Ammunition Sales Act, designated as HR 7166. Now, the name alone tells you exactly how they want the public to perceive this. They want you to hear "stop online ammunition sales" and think, oh, they're going after criminals buying ammo on the dark web or something. But that is not what this bill does, not even close. What this bill actually targets is you, the law-abiding citizen who shops online for ammunition the same way you'd shop for literally anything else in the modern world. This isn't even a new idea, by the way. House Democrats have introduced multiple versions of this concept over the years. It keeps coming back like a bad sequel nobody asked for. But this latest version is particularly aggressive, and it mirrors some of the most restrictive ammunition laws already on the books in certain states. We're going to get into which state specifically served as the blueprint for this, because when you see how that experiment has played out, you'll understand exactly why expanding it nationwide would be a disaster. But before we break down the specific provisions of this bill, you need to understand the broader strategy at play here, because this isn't just about ammunition. This is about a philosophical shift in how the government relates to your constitutional rights. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it.
The shop is about 12 months into an ammo shortage and says a bill in Congress right now could make that worse.
Obviously, for the right to bear arms to mean anything, we must also have access to ammunition.
Some gun owners are flocking to stores to buy ammo before that date, before the new law takes effect.
Licensing scheme for ammunition retailers prohibits online ammunition sales and establishes reporting requirements for ammunition purchases.
To require anyone selling ammunition to first obtain a license from the federal government.
This is interesting because it's not because of what they sell, but because of how they sell it.
All right, let's get into the nuts and bolts of HR 7166, because the devil really is in the details with this one. The first major provision would ban direct-to-consumer online ammunition sales entirely. Now, what does that mean in practical terms? It means that if you go online right now and order a case of 9mm to be shipped to your front door, that transaction would become illegal under this bill. Instead, you would be required to appear in person at a federally licensed dealer, present your identification, have that identification physically examined and verified, and only then could you take possession of the ammunition you already paid for. So essentially, they're not technically banning the purchase itself. They're just making the process so burdensome and inconvenient that it functionally kills online ammo commerce as we know it. Now, if that sounds familiar to some of you, there's a reason. This is almost exactly what California did. California already has an ammunition background check system in place where every single purchase of ammo must go through a licensed dealer, and depending on your situation, you might have to pass 1 or even 2 background checks just to buy a box of range ammo. That law effectively killed direct-to-consumer online ammo sales in California years ago. And here's what's really interesting about this. The California law is currently being challenged in the courts. It's heading to oral arguments in the Ninth Circuit, and there are serious constitutional questions about whether it can survive judicial scrutiny. So what are House Democrats doing? They're looking at a law that is actively being challenged as potentially unconstitutional, and they're saying, you know what, let's take this thing national. The timing alone should tell you everything about the motivations behind this bill. The second major provision expands federal licensing requirements for ammunition dealers specifically. This means new compliance costs, new regulations, new bureaucratic hurdles that businesses would have to navigate. And who do you think absorbs those costs? The dealers pass them on to consumers. So even if you're buying ammo in person at your local shop, prices go up for everyone.
None of this makes any sense from a logical perspective. So to really understand it, I have to believe that this type of legislation is being conducted out of fear.
The state tried to argue that there was historical precedent for restrictions on procuring ammunition.
Not only to be armed and disciplined, but they should have sufficient arms and ammunition to maintain a status of independence.
It's almost impossible to get that money back. And it's really, really hard to trace those accounts.
And therefore, it would be illegal under this bill for any person except for those licensed by the federal government to sell this ammunition.
But here's where it gets really concerning, and this is the provision that should make every gun owner in America pay attention. The third major component of this bill imposes mandatory reporting requirements for what they define as bulk ammunition purchases. And their definition of bulk: anything more than 1,000 rounds purchased within a 5-day business period. If you cross that threshold, the dealer is required to report that purchase to the United States Attorney General, to state law enforcement, and to local law enforcement. 3 separate government entities get notified because you bought ammo. Let that sink in for a second. You're not committing a crime. You're not under investigation. You're not a suspect in anything. You're a citizen exercising a constitutional right. And yet, 3 levels of government get a report with your name on it. Now let's talk about why this bill runs headfirst into a constitutional wall, because the legal problems here are massive. Courts have already established, even before the landmark Supreme Court decision that reshaped Second Amendment jurisprudence in recent years, that the right to keep and bear arms doesn't just protect the firearms themselves, it also protects access to ammunition. And that makes complete sense when you think about it logically. What good is a firearm without ammunition? It's a paperweight. The right becomes meaningless if the government can simply choke off your access to the thing that makes a firearm functional. Courts recognize this, and they recognized it clearly. Now, under the current legal framework established by the Supreme Court, the government bears the burden of proving that any firearms regulation is consistent with the historical tradition of firearms regulation in this country. That's the test. You can't just say public safety and call it a day anymore. You have to point to historical analogs that justify the modern restriction. And here's where Congress has a massive problem with this bill. There is no historical tradition of banning remote ammunition purchases. There is no historical tradition of requiring face-to-face identification verification for buying ammo. And there is absolutely no historical tradition of government reporting thresholds that flag citizens simply for buying a certain quantity of a lawful product. In fact, history points in the exact opposite direction. Long before the internet existed, Americans were buying firearms and ammunition through mail-order catalogs, through magazine advertisements, through all kinds of remote commerce. This was normal. This was accepted. This was part of the fabric of American commerce for well over a century. The idea that remote ammunition purchases are somehow a modern loophole that needs to be closed is historically illiterate. Remote purchasing of ammunition is as American as apple pie. The internet just made it faster. So when supporters of this bill frame it as common sense, what they're really doing is hoping you don't know the history. They're banking on the assumption that most people will hear stop online ammo sales and nod along without asking the critical question, does the government actually have the authority to do this?
The Ninth Circuit upheld a district court injunction enforcing background checks to purchase ammunition.
To be able to sell ammunition under HR 1207, you must be a licensed importer, licensed manufacturer, or a licensed dealer.
It's a big unknown circle right now that we would love to have the answer to and hope to get it very soon.
And, it's just basic human emotion. People fear they hate what they fear, and they fear what they can't understand.
And that brings us to what might be the most important point about this entire bill. Who does it actually affect? Supporters will tell you this is about public safety. They'll say that public safety has to come before convenience. That's their talking point, and on the surface it sounds reasonable. But peel back that layer and the argument completely falls apart. Criminals do not buy ammunition online under their real names. Criminals do not present valid identification to licensed dealers. Criminals are not going to comply with reporting thresholds. Criminals, by definition, do not care about the law. That's what makes them criminals. So who does this bill actually burden? Competitive shooters who go through thousands of rounds in a single weekend, hunters who stock up before the season, instructors and trainers who burn through ammunition daily, everyday gun owners who buy in bulk because it's cheaper and more practical. These are the people who would feel the weight of this legislation, and every single one of them is a law-abiding citizen. And let's talk about that 1,000-round threshold for a moment, because anti-gun politicians have this bizarre notion that owning 1,000 rounds of ammunition is somehow extreme or suspicious. A single training course can easily consume 1,000 rounds or more in a day. If you shoot recreationally even twice a month, you'll blow through 1,000 rounds without thinking about it. Ammunition is consumable. It doesn't replenish itself. You use it and then you buy more. That's how it works. Buying in bulk is not suspicious. It's economical. It's practical. It's what responsible gun owners do. But treating these perfectly ordinary purchases as reportable events to 3 levels of government isn't a safety measure. It's surveillance. It's the creation of a de facto registry of ammunition buyers, and it normalizes the idea that the government has a right to monitor how you exercise your constitutional freedoms. Today, it's 1,000 rounds. Tomorrow it could be 500, then 100. The threshold can always move once the framework is in place, and that's exactly the point. Now, the realistic chances of this bill gaining serious momentum right now are slim. The current makeup of Congress doesn't favor it, and even if it somehow made it through both chambers, the likelihood of it being signed into law under the current administration is extremely low. But that doesn't mean you should ignore it. Political landscapes shift. Midterms can change the balance of power overnight, and bills like this have a way of coming back in slightly different forms until one day the conditions are right and they slip through. If you care about your constitutional rights, make your voice heard. Contact your representatives. Tell them this bill deserves zero traction, because once you let the government put a gate between you and your ammunition, you've handed them the key to your Second Amendment rights, and getting that key back is a fight nobody should have to wage. That's it for today, folks. See you in the next video.